Welcome to Queer in Science. Welcome to Queer in Science, Theology, Philosophy, and Spirituality. This is the LGBTQ Center for Science, Theology, Philosophy, and Spirituality. And those are sounds from China. Wow. Listen to the strings being plucked. And there's a flute being played. Wow, beautiful. Now we are back discussing what's hot in the news. And this is Franklin Graham reacts to Pope proposing change to Lord's Prayer. And I liked the article. Now, end of the story. The Pope's suggestion to amend the Lord's Prayer is moving forward as the Vatican as Italian bishops consider changing the line, lead us not into temptation. Pope Francis has reportedly proposed switching out the age-old line with abandon us not when in temptation, after saying last year that the current version was not a good translation. Now, you have to understand this, what Pope Francis is saying is very important. He's hitting on the issues of translation. Now, people need to understand something about the Bible. The Bible is a collection of books written in more than 2 languages. We have Hebrew, we have Aramaic, and we have Greek. Now, in its original sense. But there are 6,000 languages in the Bible, in the world, sorry. 6,000 languages in the world. Now, in those 6,000 languages, the world, in the 6,000 languages in the world, it means we're supposed to have 6,000 versions of the Bible in every language. However, in English, we have 200 versions. So multiply 200 times 6,000 languages. That will give you 1.2 million Bible versions. Think about that. 1.2 million Bible versions. Because assuming that the way in English people have translated the Bible 200 times. There are over 200 versions of the Bible in English. And there are 6,000 languages in the world. Now imagine if all those 6,000 languages had 200 versions of each language. So that is going to give you 6,000 times 2 is 12,000, then 20 is 120,000, and then 200 is 1.2 million. Wonderful. 1.2 million Bibles. Can you imagine? Think about that. 1.2 million Bibles in the world. Now, what does that mean? It means that the translation, the language will be diluted, and some translations will sound like errors. You see, that's why if I was even arguing to myself that Jesus never wrote a book and he saved himself from the errors of translation. That's the beauty of the fact that Jesus didn't write a book, because the rest of the people wrote books, but they were not aware that there was going to be a time when people are going to translate what they're writing. In fact, translation only happened in the New Testament time. Now, so the Pope is saying the prayer, the Lord's Prayer, is not a good translation. When they say, lead us not into temptation. And so the French Catholics have been using a revised version of Notre Père since last year, and the current amendment on the table only applies to the Italian translation. So you see, the amendment only applies to the Italian translation, not to the other translations, but the Italian one. Responding to the proposed changes, now this is our story, Samaritan Trust President Franklin Graham explained why he would not use the updated verbiage in his own prayers. Of course, he can't use it because, number one, it only applies to Italian. He said it was possible that there was an error in the original translation of the Lord's Prayer, but urged caution in introducing any formal changes. So he's saying that it could be there's an error, but just because there's an error doesn't mean you can change it, amend it. I'm not a Catholic, but there possibly could be a translation error with that one word. I don't know, he said. I'm still going to say it the way I memorized it as a boy, that my mother taught me. But the Pope, he might have a point here, so we'll see. Yes, so he's saying he'll keep on staying with that. But the Pope, I am with the Pope because the Pope was fighting a theological battle, because what it is, the Pope is saying that God cannot lead you into temptation. When you say it in Italian, it sounds like God takes you into temptation. However, the video somewhere in Rex Arthur TV that our secular channel, but it's still connected to this one because it's not so. We are also faith person in the Rex Arthur movement station. And it's just what he was saying is in that discussion we were talking about interpretations of the Word of God. God forbid, but they are what you call sinister interpretations. A sinister interpretation is where you feel like God is planned an event against you. He set you up, like when you read the story of the Garden of Eden, a sinister interpretation of the Garden of Eden is God doing what? Setting up Adam and Eve to sin. He knew, because when you look at that story critically, what does it tell you? It tells you that I'm going to ask God, you knew people are going to sin, so why did you stop them? Why didn't you stop them? You should have stopped them from sinning, because the way the world is, it goes through problems that people, like we're seeing climate change and all of these things happening in the world, and a lot of upheavals and a lot of wars and a lot of violence and a lot of problems and a lot of famine. I mean, did we have to go through a story in the Garden of Eden to get all of that to happen? I mean, you'd have just stopped it and built a utopia, That's what we want to do. Like right now, I'm preaching about utopian eschatology. Utopian eschatology. And I'm not seeing a dystopia in the way. I'm seeing a utopia in the way. Hallelujah. It's coming. And we're building it right now. We have been building it ever since human beings lived on the earth. We have been building a utopia. This is why progressiveness is a utopian philosophy. Progressive people, progressive minds, just like QSTPS, is a utopian philosophy. It's a belief that we're supposed to make the world better and better and better, day by day. Even if you die after 70 years, of working on the planet, you will leave the planet better than you found it. That's why we have climate change conferences. That's why we have United Nations General Assemblies to discuss how to make the world better. That's why we have Millennium Development Goals. That's why we have international aid, so that you can help countries to get better and better. You see what has happened in Africa? It's a miracle. You look at Nigerian movies and you look at the houses. They are beautiful. People are building beautiful houses. People are building beautiful buildings. You come to Nairobi, Kenya, they're building beautiful buildings. And then you go to South Africa, they're building beautiful buildings. Go to China, and China that was so empty is now a builded up country. And of course, climate change has come because of these many buildings, but it's not that we can't stop. We can't build. We should stop building. And then so that there is no climate change. Climate change is part of nature. It's just that this time it accelerated because of man's activities. Man's activities just hastened climate change, but the fact is the climate change has always been part of the history of the world. Yes, because climate change is just change in climate over a period of time. And remember the ages of the world. We had the Ice Age. Yes, Ice Age. What was the Ice Age? The earth was covered in ice. That is the teaching we were given. And the earth was covered in ice. Now it's not covered in ice, it's covered with water and land. That's what you have to understand. And then there are other ages. We'll do a very nice video about the ages of the world. Of course, the world has no end, but the ages change. So there's age change, just like there's climate change, and there is weather change, and there is like I was doing I was thinking to myself, sometimes I have random thoughts and I enjoy them. And I was saying the horoscopes, I was talking to some people and I asked them, oh, do you follow horoscopes? I said, nah, we don't follow them. And I told them, you should be at least concerned about them. And I told them the reason why I'm concerned about them, because the zodiac, astrology, do you know what astrology is? It is the knowledge of stars. And the biggest star is the sun. It is the center of the solar system. It's the center of the solar system. So when you study stars, you are actually studying the sun. It's beautiful. And it's also beautiful that in the Bible, the sun is called the morning star or the day star. The star that comes out in the day. Beautiful. Oh, just listen to that. The day star. And you look at it shining. It comes because it is the star that creates the day. And so when I went down to read the word zodiac, I noticed something. The zodiac system, the zodiac calendar, is actually the zoo, because the word zodiac comes from the word zoo, which means animals. Animal. And then what is weird is that Zoe in Greek is life. So the zodiac system is the life system. the life system. And remember, an animal, I've told you the word zoo, which forms the word zodiac, which means animals. The zoo means animal. And animal in Latin is anima, which means to be animated, to have life. So, the calendar, the zodiac, the astrological calendar is actually an animal calendar, a life calendar. Because animal just means life, life form. Animal is a life form that moves about, you see. And of course, we have to, there's a definition of animal that we will study one time. As I told you, we are higher animals. Yes. And even if you read the Bible, the angels of God, some of them are animals. There's an ox, there's a creature that has a face of an ox, an eagle, and a man, and an eagle man, and I forget. It's been long since I read that thing from an ox, an eagle, and a man. Oh, I'm forgetting the other animal that appears in the Ezekiel vision. So there are 4, which are actually flying serpents. They are before the presence of God. Because a seraph in Hebrew means a fiery serpent, and they are flying. So animals form part of the kingdom of God, and humans are higher animals. As I've told you, they are angels which have animal features. In the ones Ezekiel saw, they had hooves like a cow and a horse. So what does this mean? These angels can have hooves. It's beautiful. So we're going to do a study about the angels. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is the world is going through changes, because that's the world. Time is filled with changes. And remember, time is life. Time is life. And life is time. So in the ancient times, it is the ancient life. And in the present times, it's the present life. And the future times is the future life. And the end times is the end of life. But as I told people, these days, everybody has their own end time, meaning everyone has the time to die, to leave the world. And you got your end time, I've got my end time. So I tell the end time movement people, well, if you tell me these are the end times and I die, I think I've got to my end time already. Because end times is end of life. It's beautiful. And he said, I'm just going to say how I memorized it. He continued, you have to be very careful when you change the word of God. We do recognize that there are translation errors, and there are a lot of translations out there in English language, but some vary a little bit. But you have to be very, very careful. And I know that the Catholics have been very careful, as they've studied this for 16 years, and they're just not doing this haphazardly. They have put a lot of thought and a lot of study. So it is an interesting point. So what Franklin Graham is trying to say, and what we are saying with Franklin Graham and the Pope, they are saying the same thing. We are saying the same thing in this regard. I don't agree with Franklin Graham when it comes to homophobia. Yes, we really don't support his homophobic vitriol. In fact, the Pope is better. He has accepted gay people, and we honor and recognize the Pope for that. But what I'm saying, we can agree with Franklin, is that he at least he can recognize there are translation errors. This is a very important statement coming from an evangelical. The evangelical church And some of the Protestant churches believe the Word of God is inerrant. It has no error. But the actions of the Pope is a clear sign that the Word of God can actually have errors. Translation errors. And remember, diversity is the principal. So there are diversity of errors. Translation errors, nominal errors. These are the names of places. You know, in the old English Bibles, they used to call Israel Palestine. Yes. Are you seeing the war in Israel? It is because of historic error or a historic. Israel used to be called Palestine by the Romans. That is what happened. So today, the Israeli conflict with the Palestinians is basically based on a nominal error, because when the Romans went there, they called Israel Palestine. And then, remember, when the Romans were the last power to cause a very major dispersion of Jewish people. So when the Jews left Israel, which was called Palestine, in AD 70, there were few Jews, very, very few. Read the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The best history. What I mean by the best, it is the saddest. You know, it was like, how could this have happened? You know, it's like an action-packed movie. How they went with Titus and they invaded. They invaded Jerusalem. And the Jews left Israel or Palestine, because remember, Israel was a colony in the time of Jesus. It was a Roman colony. It was not Israel. That's why Jesus, they asked him in the story of Jesus that, whom should we pay tribute to? And he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Why were they giving to Caesar? Do you know why were they giving to Caesar? Because Caesar was the colonial power of Israel. And as I told you, it was called Palestine. So this, now you've got to understand, the Bible and most of these books, they were written in times when they were Muslim. There were also Muslims who colonized Israel. And they kept the Roman name of Palestine. So when you study Zionism, it grew up in the 19th century when people were saying, the Jews are very many. We don't need them here. Let them come. Maybe they can go back home. And then even the Jews themselves felt that there was a need to go back to Israel, or to get a land where they can live together. And you must understand the 19th century. It was a very beautiful time. It was a time nationalism was rising. Whenever you see nationalism rise, know there's a war coming. That's what happened in the 19th century. In the end of the 19th century, there was nationalism. There was German nationalism, because Germany became a united nation in 1871. And the Jews also had their nationalism, which they called Zionism. Because everyone in Europe was getting nationalistic. The Germans were nationalistic. The Italians also went through reunification in the 19th century, and Italy was united. because those are divided country. And then all of these people, all of these countries in Europe. And then you had the scramble for Africa, when it was European nations that met in Belgium to divide Africa. So this was the meeting called the Scramble of Africa was a nationalistic, multinational meeting of nations. There was no EU that time. You see, that's what you need to understand. There was no EU. So because there was no EU, these nations were not going to Africa as one group. They were going to Africa as individuals. So when they had a meeting, that meeting of the Berlin Conference was a nationalistic meeting, because multinational meeting, because it was many nations meeting to discuss about Africa. So what am I trying to show you? I'm trying to show you there was nationalism in Europe, and the Jews also had their nationalism, and it was called Zionism. Why did this happen? And we're not going to do this now, but we're going to take time to teach people, because I'm even going to a playlist that is going to be discussing the Israeli conflict and how the world can bring peace there. Now, that is what we can discuss. But basically, what you need to know is when the Zionists now found time to go to Israel, they were given Israel. And remember, Israel was being occupied. By the time it was being occupied, it was occupied by the Ottoman Empire. But the Ottoman Empire was collapsing. And when Britain saw the Ottoman Empire collapsing, it came in as a trustee of the land of Israel once the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And then the Jews were told they can come to Israel. But it was called Palestine. Go and read the history of how Jews went to Israel. If you read the old maps, it was called Palestine. So even if you go to Israel today, the maps have changed. The maps have changed. They have written Israel, and because they have now come back home. And so this is the war between Palestinians and the Israelis. They are using history. You really have to have historical records. This is why the Bible is used, especially the Old Testament, because that is a story of the Israelis, is used by them as evidence, and the Palestinians are using the Roman history as evidence, because when the Romans colonized Israel, they didn't call it Israel. They called it Palestine. So that's the war. The war is historic. Just look at it. And it's because of a nominal error. So there are very many errors in the Bible. Translation, as you said, nominal errors, errors of names, errors of thought, mental errors. You can find that someone has written this and it doesn't really make sense. And as I've told you, in some languages, when they translate the Bible, when they say, let the meditation of my heart, they will say the meditation of my intestines. Because in their language, they don't have the word heart. When they used to slaughter animals, the part they used to eat or they found very important is the intestines, not the heart. So when the translators went to them and told them, what's the most important part in the body? It's the intestines. And so they say, and the meditation of my intestines. Yes. So when you read meditation of my heart and then you read meditation of my intestines, which Bible is right? They are all right. Yes. I love King James Version of the Bible, but right now I can read any Bible version. Yes. I can read any Bible version, but I prefer the King James version of the Bible because it's the easiest English. Contrary to belief, people think it's the hardest English. It's the easiest because it uses few words and it was translated very well. So I'm King James version, but I'm not dogmatic. I'm not King James version only. I used to be a King James version only, or even if I'm a King James version only, I can still read other versions of the Bible. So the Pope highlighted a translation issue in the Lord's Prayer when petitioning for change in wording last year, insisting that God does not lead people into temptation. But this is a theological argument because it could be true that God does lead people into temptation, like Abraham. God told Abraham, go and sacrifice Isaac. That is a tempting situation. You know, how can you kill your only son and you're 100 years old? And then God tells you, I want you to kill him. Come and offer that son, your only son, as a sacrifice. You know? And how would Abraham react? Wasn't that temptation? So I just think what the Pope needs to understand that's happening in the world, people are reading the Bible, some are not reading it, and because of that, people are they have very new, diverse interpretations of the Bible. That's why we have many versions. That's why we have many denominations. That's why we have many. I mean, please, people, relax. Don't get so worked up when it comes to religion. Don't get so that my religion is the one. No, relax. There are so many religions. That's why we're saying everybody's going to heaven. Because sincerely, how will you punish people in a world where they have gone to one religion that they think is the way? You see? So, relax. A father does not do that. A father helps you get up immediately. You see, personally, I beg to differ with the Pope on that. Yes, there are some fathers who, diversity of fathers. Some fathers are sinister fathers. Some fathers are good fathers. Some fathers are kind. Some fathers are rough. Some fathers are soft. Some fathers are poor. Some fathers are rich. Diversity of fathers. So, the Pope's understanding of a father is a father should never lead his child into temptation. But what I can tell the Pope, well, there's a benefit of doubt on that statement because there are some fathers who can do that. That's what I'm calling the sinister interpretation. All right, it's Satan who leads us into temptation. That's his department. Okay, now you may have a point there because in the Garden of Eden, it's the serpent that led people to temptation. You see, it's not the Lord, but the serpent that led people into temptation. But what I'm trying to tell, there are many scriptures in the Bible that talk about God tempting people. So Graham was then asked by the Fox News host if it was right to say that God may allow us to be tempted, but it is Satan to lead us. He replied, well, that would be my view, no question. And I think we do pray that the Lord will protect us from temptation and that we would not be led into temptation. Yeah, so the Fox News host said, maybe God allows us to be tempted, like what happened in the Garden of Eden. But it's Satan who leads us into temptation. So that's what he said. Anyway, it's a very interesting discussion. I liked it. But what I want you to know is, please understand, there are errors in the scriptures. And what does this mean? The Bible is errant. Yes, it has errors. It's understandable, it has errors. It's written by humans. Yes, that's what you need to understand. It's a fact. And some errors is not spelling errors. It is grammatical errors and translation errors, because the Bible is not written in your language, English, French, Jamaican, Creole. It was written in Hebrew, originally in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. So they are, so that means that when there are some words in your language, like when I was thinking about this article, I thought to myself, there are some dead languages in the world. What do you mean by dead languages? They have not created new words. New words. And there are new concepts that are in the world. Do you know there are new things that have come in the world? That's why I also disagree with Solomon's view, there's nothing new under the sun. No. For every general rule, there's an exception. So there are new things that have never existed in the world that have existed. So living languages create new words for these new concepts and things. But dead languages do not form new words because they are dead. They don't form new words for new things because they are dead. So what happens is, like, if you have a dead language, it cannot translate the word application, a mobile phone application. It can't. It cannot translate the word software because it's a dead language. And I think Latin is semi-dead, and so is Greek, because we still use it in medicine and law. But generally, it's dead because I've never known what. We'll find out the word application, but in some dead languages, there is no mobile phone application, the translation of the word mobile phone application. But English does have this, because English is a living language. It's always creating new words for new concepts. And this is what people need to understand, even in theology right now, and philosophy, and spirituality. But spirituality is okay, because spirituality, you don't necessarily need words. You can just do any activity, a spiritual activity, so that's okay. But in science, in theology, and in philosophy, there is a need to refurbish and to rejuvenate a dead language for you to pass on a scientific concept. Like in Africa, when it comes to homosexuality, there are some tribes which do not have a term. So when you tell them that you're a homosexual, they look at you and then they say, "Oh, what are you saying?" We are saying a man and a man having sex, or a woman and a woman having sex. Then they will tell you, "Okay, so who is the man in the sex and who is the woman in the sex?" When they are studying homosexual sex. So what does this mean? To them, their understanding of sex is hetero. Even when it is two people of the same sex, they still see it as hetero, because there is a receiver and a giver. So they understand sex, the understanding of sex, and it's very weird philosophically, because homosexual sex, there's no difference between it and heterosexuality. The only difference is the partners, the type of players, whether they're of the same sex or different sex. That's the only difference. The rest of it is the same. Yes, because there's a receiver and there's a giver. So maybe the giver is a woman, but the receiver is a man. Or the giver is a man and the receiver is a man. Or the giver is a woman and the receiver is a woman. So these are the things you have to understand. Some tribes do not have translated those terms, those concepts, like the word queer. So the secret is you encourage living languages to be in use in a country. And I think one reason why homophobia is rampant in Africa and transphobia is because the languages have not been developed. That's what you need to understand. there are very many dead languages in Africa. So for that, these I would advise the African language, African countries to have language boards that will sit down and create new words for the new languages. For the new concepts and new things that have come out in the world, so that we can now, every language in the world, to make them living languages. Other than that, if you do not borrow, get new words for the new concepts that are in the world, your language will remain dead. And as time goes by, your language will be very redundant, because when you travel to the world, when you go to Europe, you can't use your local language. Have you gone to Google Translate? They have very few African languages because of that problem. The database of the language is very small compared to European languages. So that's what Africans are really tasked to do. Okay guys, thank you so much for joining us as we reviewed this story.